to 7 feet. I think 7 feet is on the higher end. Still impactful, though, and those rip currents will be dangerous. You'll notice the red flag warnings up and down the coast.
Forecasters expect Ernesto to remain well away from the East Coast as it slowly tracks towards Newfoundland. The FDA has authorized the first at-home, over-the-counter syphilis test. Rob Martier has more.
On Friday, the FDA granted authorization to a test that detects syphilis antibodies in human blood. The new test, called First to Know, helps identify past or current infection, with results available in about 15 minutes.
The test results must be confirmed by a healthcare provider. You're listening to the latest on Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT Willow Springs, is powered by ComEd. Visit ComEd.com/clean.
Think Theory Radio.
We enter this world of hyper-reality. In case you didn't know, hyper-reality is the inability of consciousness to distinguish reality from a simulation of reality, especially in technologically advanced societies. The action of hyper-reality is to desire reality in an attempt to achieve that desire to fabricate a false reality that is to be consumed as real.
Think Theory Radio with Damian Perdue. Saturdays at 6 p.m. on WCPT 820.
Welcome home, Riot Fest!
We are back!
Riot Fest is coming back home to Douglas Park, September 20th through September 22nd. Come see all of your favorite bands, Fall Out Boy, Beck, Slayer, and many more. Tickets are available at riotfest.org. But if you join the WCPT 820 Club at heartlandsignal.com, you just might be able to win a pair. Riot Fest, back in Douglas Park, September 20th through the 22nd.
This is your WCPT Progressive Calendar. Thursday, September 5th at noon, join Cook County Assessor Fritz Kagi and Jason Tyler, Chief Financial Officer at Northern Trust, for a conversation about the 2024 Cook County Reassessment of Property Values and the outlook for commercial real estate in Chicago. The event takes place at Maggiano's Banquets, 111 West Grand Avenue in Chicago. Wednesday, September 18th at 6 p.m., the Doc C. Bracey Center for Human Reconciliation presents a virtual Zoom event, The White Power Movement, its history, threat, and what you can do about it. The featured speaker is Julie Farnham, former Acting Director of Intelligence for the U.S. Capitol Police and author of Domestic Darkness, an insider's account of the January 6th insurrection and the future of right-wing extremism. Learn more and register for the event at dcbcenter.org/events.
Check up on health with Chris Whitting.
If you have high cholesterol, there are things to try, like dietary changes, before beginning a lifelong regimen of cholesterol-lowering drugs, according to Dr. David Vitko, the author of Perfect Cholesterol in 3 Weeks.
Let's do something drastic for a few weeks, really lower that cholesterol fast, and then you can eat some of the foods you love again in such a way that you don't raise the cholesterol back up. For 3 weeks, it removes all saturated animal fats from the diet. Saturated animal fats are found in a lot of foods, in baked goods, certainly in butter and dairy products. You know, meat isn't the only thing, because there are saturated fats in nuts, and nuts are a big part of this diet. It's not what you do once in a while that undermines your health. It's what you do on a daily basis that chips away at your health.
Dr. Vitko says he limits himself to splurging on no more than one fatty meal per week. With Checkup on Health, I'm Chris Whitting.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
The following program, Collaboraction Radio, is sponsored by Collaboraction, and to the extent applicable, their guests. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily reflect those of Heartland Signal, LLC, or its management.
Oh, yeah. Welcome. Hello.
Hello.
You're with Collaboration Radio on WCPT, Chicago's progressive talk radio. I'm Anthony Mosley, and that was DJ Lady D with our opening vibration to help us stop the rest of our world and begin the radio show. Thank you for joining us. We're also here live on the radio if you're listening. Good day. It's August 17th, 2024. We're also streaming live right now on Facebook and YouTube. And we'll be soon podcasting from where you get all your digital stuff. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. And it's an exciting week here. It is the middle of August, and on the verge of the Democratic National Convention. I don't know if you heard, but the Democrats are coming. They're already here. They're already here. And it's a huge week for Collaboration. Collaboration is a 27-year-old nonprofit. And our mission is to build knowledge, empathy, dialogue, and action around oppression and inequity through live theater, film, radio, to leverage the power of storytelling and community to cultivate positive social change. And we're here every Saturday at 4 o'clock Central Time. This is our 55th episode. So for those of you that have been on the journey with us here at Collaboration Radio, thank you. It's great to be with you once again. And if it's your first episode, well, it's gonna be a great one. And I'm so glad you're here. Collaboration Radio is sponsored by the Joseph and Bessie Feinberg Foundation, AV Chicago, Chicago's leading provider of AV production and event management services. If you need really great lighting, video, sound for your big special event, they have the gear and the geeks to get it done. That's just a tagline I made up for them.
Was it approved?
No, it was not approved. And that's how good our relationship is with the people at AV Chicago. And Illiatovitch. Illiatovitch is a purpose-driven destination and event management company that seeks to become a trusted strategic ally to your business as they delight your audience and generate impactful outcomes. That's Illiatovitch. Elovoque. They rock. And they help us with our gala every year, the Utopian Ball, on November 2nd. That's right, it's coming up again. That's the problem with those galas. They just keep on coming. And we hope you'll join us on November 2nd in Venue West for ours as a volunteer or a host committee or a sponsor, or just sending us your good vibes will do. After today's show, if you feel impassioned and you want to join the conversation, you can email us at radio@collaboraction.org or go to www.collaboraction.org to learn more. And of course, you can call in too, and we're going to get to that. I'm very excited about our guests in the studio today. One of them I go way back with and have lived a few lives with.
a few very different lives.
And the other one I just met.
That's me.
And we are kind of both connected through guest number one.
Oh.
And yeah, we have Sarah Illiatovitch-Goldman and Dan Chapman-Smith. Dan is the executive director of Project Humanity in Toronto, and we're going to chat with him and them about their work, and it's really fascinating, powerful, important work. And Project Humanity is in Toronto. And so it's going to be really exciting to just kind of get Dan and Sarah's perspective on their theater work, their work with young people, but also just kind of getting their perspective on the Chicago thing and how it is similar or different than the Toronto thing. And, of course, even more important, the human thing. But first, Collaboraction news and updates. And that's my... Thank you, Dan.
Fully artists.
Collaboraction has been invited to have our young people, our youth program. We have the Light and the Luminaries. The Light are the 14 to 18-year-olds, and the 18 to 25-year-olds are the Luminaries. They create work to inspire social change. We have been invited to perform, drumroll, at the DNC. How about it? Of course, at first I was like, yeah, at the United Center. I can see it. But even better yet, we will be in the concourse of the McCormick Place. On Monday and Thursday, we will be have 2 half-hour sets. And there will be some young people putting their whole thing on the stage for folks to see. We've gone through the vetting process, and I did get approved to attend. So
that
that's
is
good.
Shocking news.
It's amazing.
That's really
and I will be tabling all day Monday. I have to be there before 8 o'clock.
Wow.
Yeah. And I just thought, hey, might as well go all in, you know? So,
do you ever not?
No, I don't.
I've never seen you not go all in on anything.
I mean, I would say that I underserved my ice cream a couple days ago, but the fact that I had ice cream at all, considering everything else I had done that day, was pretty much all in.
Relative all in, yeah.
So if you are at the DNC, stop in McCormick Place. Stop by and check us out. Let me pull up the schedule here so that I can share it with everybody. I don't have it at my fingertips. It's in the afternoon on both days. And go to Collaboration social media. We'll be pushing it out there all the times, and the 5 young people that'll be representing us. So that's exciting. And then if that wasn't enough, Friday, August 23rd. Here's my camera. That's right. We've been talking about it, Henry, for a long time. We've been talking about it for 2 or 3 months now. We will be co-producing Sandra Delgado's La Habana Madrid with Teatro Vista at the Pritzker Pavilion of Millennium Park as part of their 20th anniversary season. I think it was just 2 weeks ago. We had Cheryl Lynn Bruce, the director, and Sandra, the writer and narrator. She plays La Habana Madrid itself, an embodiment of the club. We'll be there at Millennium Park, and it's something, you know, when you work your whole career on really intimate shows that touch
this
people.
This is the opposite.
Yeah,
this is giant.
We have to. We're in rehearsals for 2 weeks. We have 10 equity contracts, which is the stage union for actors and stage management. And so that's kind of a lot of union contracts for us. We load in at 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday the 23rd. It takes about 2 or 3 hours to get all our special lights and video, and we will have the first disco ball in the history of Pritzker Pavilion.
The first?
Yeah. Nobody has been able to trick them into actually doing a disco ball, and then they met me.
Yeah, I've never seen you without a disco ball.
Exactly. We have a disco ball in our kitchen. We do, with a motor and an LED light.
That's spectacular.
I lost the remote for the LED, so it's only on blue, But that's kind of cool. It's just,
that's the right vibe.
So we load in at 10. We then get on the stage by 1. We have a band, Carpaccio e Su Super Combo, so we do some sound checks for the band and the actors. Meanwhile, the lighting designer, Mr. Jeremy Getz, will be programming lights during the daytime in the sun. And then, by 5:30, DJ Julio Bishop kicks it off with a salsa dance party. He's going backwards in time. Salsa today. He's going backwards to 1960. And then at 6:30, we start the show, and we will be, in theater, you normally have a tech rehearsal, and then you have some dress rehearsals, and then you have some previews. We just go from load in to daytime tech to doing a show for 10,000 people.
Of course you do.
Yeah. And I've had to remind the team, this is a staged concert. Mm-hmm. This is not Broadway, okay? If you don't know what a stage concert is, Google Les Miserables stage concert, and they have the 25-year anniversary.
Is that for me?
That's for
you.
you.
Just throw
Yeah.
that in?
Yes.
So, fun fact: Anthony was in my wedding party. My wedding involved a Les Mis flash mob, where Mr. Anthony Mosley and Sandra Delgado played the Thénardiers.
Yes.
At my wedding. That might have been the most important, the marriage part was cool, but that was probably the highlight.
And your husband, the Brian Lovner.
Correct.
What, he sang this for you at your first date or second date or something?
It was a whole it was a whole thing. He knew the whole, the confrontation between Javert and Jean Valjean over Fantine's dead body. So he knew that, and, there's literally nothing sexier in the world to me, and so I was like, cool, I'm just going to marry you, move to Chicago. The rest was history.
And yeah, we did a flash mob. We surprised Sarah, the bride, with a flash mob performance at her wedding. And, but yeah, go watch that Les Mis, and that is an example of a great stage concert, and that's what we're doing on Friday, August 23rd. Bring the whole family. The show really, if you're listening, go back and go to Collaboraction Spotify or YouTube and listen to episode, I think it was 53, with the two geniuses at the head of this show, Sherilyn Bruce and Sandra Delgado, and listen to where this show came from. Because, there are theater productions that, like Les Mis, no offense, Sarah, that, they tell a great story and the craft is amazing and they transport you and they make an impact on your life. And then there's other shows that kind of cut through all of that because they're not about a story of fictional people. They're actually about the people in the room connecting on a very deep level around sometimes even subconscious issues that are keeping us from belonging to one another and from really being the best of humanity. And I only said sorry, Sarah, because she's crazy about Les Mis, but
no offense taken.
But she is also like Dan and myself, and very much
it work for both of you.
Yeah,
doing the other kind of theater.
Well, you do the other kind of theater, and you do it very well. And I've had a great pleasure of working with you on a couple of really huge, important projects in my life, and your work around trauma-informed approaches and with children is another show.
That's another show. We'll do that show. But we only have Dan. He leaves the country.
He just got here.
He just got here, and he's going to leave. So you got to talk to him.
Welcome to Chicago, Dan.
Well, thank you.
Dan Chapman-Smith, or I should say Daniel Chapman-Smith, is an accomplished arts educator and facilitator based in Toronto. He is also the founding executive director of Project Humanity, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting social justice and equity through the arts. Over the past 16 years, Daniel has developed and led theater workshops for youth in shelters and schools through Project Humanity. He has also trained over 130 artist facilitators through PH 1-to-1, an arts mentorship program and drama drop-in and in-shelter drama program. Project Humanity uses the arts as a critical tool to create community, respond to trauma, decrease isolation, and affect change. PH has two arms. Youth program engages and inspires youth on the margins with a special focus on youth in shelter system, and our PH Theater arm, which uses verbatim theater to explore questions of social justice with general audiences locally, provincially, and nationally. Dan, welcome to Collaboraction Radio. It's so great to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Let's start with actually you just fleshing out a little bit more this amazing work that you're doing with young people, sometime often in very vulnerable situations.
Yeah. So we really have two, main programs we're running with youth, and primarily in the shelter system. So we have this drama program that we started in 2007. We started just schlepping out to shelters and running a drama program, trying to figure out what that was. And so over the years, we've honed that. It's sort of like a 60-minute improv-based session. So we show up at the shelter and we assemble a group of youth from whoever's there in the common space. We go every week. They come to know that we're coming, and we get a bit of a following as the population turns over. It's a transient group, but we do sort of improv-based games. We facilitate discussions in the space, and we end up setting up sort of some like rehearsing for life kind of role play scenarios where people get to step into different situations that might be causing them anxiety or might be loaded for them in certain ways. And they get to have these kind of fun improv-y type playing out these scenarios, which also kind of give them a little rehearsal for real life. So that's like the drama program. And then we have this mentorship program, one-to-one. And so they're doing exactly that, pairing up one-to-one with professional artists in any medium of their choosing. This is something we developed during the pandemic. I can go into more of that story later. But they get 12 weeks with a professional artist. They get to go on a bit of a creative journey. And then over the course of that time, they tend to connect to other resources through the artist, to other communities or opportunities to, find different communities of support and engage with different things through that form.
So now let's take a step back and talk about your origin story. How did you get to be this human who is going into shelters to create theater with youth? And do me a favor, cheat to the camera a little bit. I know you want to look at me, but share. You got to share the love between me and the camera.
So I might as well do the meandering version.
Yeah, please.
We've got time. So my personal origin, I was predisposed, I think, to do this kind of work in the arts, and I kind of realized I was that way pretty young. It was like in high school, there was a time where I was taking some philosophy courses and learning a little bit more about the world and inequities and what it meant to live in a North American city on the backs of problematic systems.
You grew up in Toronto?
In Toronto, yeah. This is in Earl Hague, a little arts school in northern Toronto. And so I was kind of going, I think it's actually unethical just to live in a North American city. What do I do about this? And then I was kind of like, well, I'm on the sort of arts path. I feel like maybe being in the arts is a way to kind of justify living here. Maybe it's a way for me to act on the system in some way or comment on the system. So I had that kind of thought in my mind from a very young age. And then while I was at theater school, my post-secondary program, there were like-minded people. We kind of found each other over the course of the 4 years of that program. One of the things that brought us together was there was a local minister from a nearby church who approached the faculty and said, are there some of the drama students who would come and perform in prisons around the holiday? And so the people who were drawn to that work, all of the beginning members of Project Humanity were in sort of that group who were interested in that kind of work. And so when we finished that program, we kind of assembled. It was also around the time that the tsunami had happened in 2005, I think. And so we were kind of going like, what can we do as artists? And we put a like fundraiser type artistic event together. And over the course of a few years, we just started picking up different projects. But one of the things we did for 5 years in a row was we had an arts-based event, and we asked people to bring and donate some nice clothes that we could bring to shelters. And we would do that. We'd like sort all these clothes. It was like a wild event, and we would rent a van, and me and my buddy Antonio would drive around to like 10 different shelters in the city, dropping off all these clothes. And one of the shelters we went to, the first time we went there, Youth Without Shelter, this woman who was working there as a development coordinator, Judy LaRue, took Antonio and I aside and was like, come and take a tour of the shelter. And we're like, we've got like 1 day to get to 10 shelters. I think that day we also had to like drive back downtown to a theater for one of us to do an audition halfway through and get back. It was like just a ridiculous day. And we're like, there's no way we have time for this. But we were like, of course we have time for this. And so we walked around the shelter, and that was kind of a cementing moment for us where we went like, this is a place we should be. We had already talked about we wanted to be working with youth. And we were like, okay, we're just going to come here and figure out like how we can be of use. And so that was like a moment where we connected to that shelter, and in particular started going and running a drama program, and kind of, organically figured it out over time, like what was the value of what we were doing, what were we needed, what was the youth needing that we were working with. And so over time developed that relationship with the shelter and that understanding of how impactful showing up as artists and playing around and doing some like drama stuff together could be. And that kind of set us down the path.
So what in your first 10 years of life, or what about your environment growing up or your family? A lot of people get drawn to theater in Chicago because they like the way it makes them feel about themselves, and then they want to be on TV or film. They want to have it for a career path. What was it about you that made you want to, serve others with your work?
Yeah. I think I similarly had a draw to theater and the arts through like young experiences of it, and just loved participating in it. When I was young, I think my parents saw that I was a little bit, liked to be in the limelight and just socially was different, and they found out about an arts program that started in like grade 4, and they were like, well, let's have them audition for it, and I got into that school. And so from the age of like 9, I had just way more arts exposure and arts education than the average person does. The school did like half the day was arts and half the day was academics, but it was just like a public school, so it had to like cram everything in. And I think that was, I think that just got the joy of arts and performing into me. And then like the aspect of teaching it and wanting to do it with young people, I think came also in some of my early, like I went to summer camp as a kid as well, and worked at summer camp for like quite a few years after I finished that whole leadership, like the whole run of being a camper and a leadership camper. And I was a sort of like the creative director at that camp for a couple of years, and I think that was
ding 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 ding. Oh, you're a camp counselor.
Yeah, totally.
So in many ways, you're going into a youth shelter, which is in a way a camp, and you're organizing, inspiring, playing with. So let's talk about that, because I think that's really. There's a lot that our listeners can learn from your insights of showing up at a shelter. These are young people that are homeless. Is that right?
Yeah.
And they end up probably on the streets. They run away. They're living on their own. And then you show up.
Yeah.
And then what happens? Walk us through like the environment, your perspective, and then the experience with the young people, And then I want to talk about, like, you know, what they teach you.
Yeah.
And can I just say one thing that is so amazing about when this program company started, how it started, was Dan and the other founders were the same age as the youth in the shelters. Because these are like 14 to 29, right? And you guys were what? 20?
Yeah,
20, you know?
Like 21, 22, yeah.
Yeah. So it's really interesting as opposed to this kind of like, oh, I grew up and now I'm giving back to this, like, I'm part of this community, you know?
Yeah, no, that did play in a certain way. I mean, I have all sorts of ideas about different levels of age and maturity and what you bring at different times, because at first I was like, oh, this makes sense. You know, so much sense. Got to be young if you're going to work with young people. And now I'm like, I'm still looking for young facilitators. I think the youth is important, but I also know what I bring now that with a bit of experience that's nice in the picture as well. But yeah, so this sort of like, what's it like in the, like, what does it look like? So there's kind of that, like, you first show up at the shelter, and I think it's easy to have like that slight intimidation factor. You have whatever your preconceived notions of, you know, who these people are, these young people who are living in a shelter. And, you know, they're not like jumping up to say hello when you walk into the place. There's a lot of the mask of cool going on. And, like, I think that's one of the things that maybe I have as a strength, that I'm kind of willing to kind of cross any sort of like threshold and just sort of put on a smile and be like, hey, I'm Dan. I don't care if I like seem dorky in this context. I'm just going to say hi, tell you what I'm here to do. But there's that sort of, like, what it looks like and feels like going in at first. It's kind of like feels like intimidating and heavy, and like, what is this space? But pretty quickly the script starts to flip, and you get in the room and you start, especially like you introduce like an improv game and you do a little demo and get people laughing a little bit. You know, you can kind of win them over that way a little bit. But then also, I think you picked up on something, showing up. So like the first time we went there, it's not like we had like, 20 people running into our room, but we just kept showing up week after week. And I think that earned us a lot of credibility with the people who were there. And then, like, quick fast forward to some of the stuff we started learning fast, was that there were not other people doing that, just showing up and just saying, I want to hang out with you for an hour, let's play these games. And so that we realized we quickly became quite valuable to a lot of those young people, and something they really looked forward to and appreciate. Because even the people working at the shelter who are there every day for them, and they're busting their butts for these young people, they're the authorities of that place. It's a different relationship. So there's not someone like us who's like an artist who comes in to do some games with them. So I think that was one of the early learnings, was how valuable it is just to show up and be interested and willing to be present with those young people in that space.
That's a big point. It's been a little over a decade now that I've really committed myself to being a part of the solution in Chicago, and I've worked in many neighborhoods, and I've built a lot of relationships. And in the beginning, I kept on encountering this kind of like, yeah, you're great, but you won't be here soon.
Yeah.
And because most folks that are challenged with things like food and housing and feeling safe, what they don't have is consistent people who show up for them. And a lot of us take it for granted. Mm-hmm. That especially if you have two parents, in the house, what that's like. And so you've been showing up for a while now, huh? You must have some fascinating relationships with some of the young people who are now adults.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's actually very rare that I get long-term, consistent connection with someone, because people are there for a minute and then they're gone, and the house turns over so frequently and so quickly. That's one of the things that maybe I didn't think of before is the nature of that population and the way that turnover does happen. I think on the emergency side, they strictly have, I mean, they're not strict at all about this, but I think they're supposed to have something like 3 months. It's like that's their allotted time to like get in, do their business, and get out.
What does that mean, to get in and get them healthy and fed, and then where do they go?
The goal is to get them into independent housing. The whole design of the shelter is get people who don't have a home and find them a home, and hopefully create some stability in a direction so that they can sustain that. But that's that's not like it's not a huge success of the system. I mean, people get out and back into the system a lot. That boomerang effect is in strong effect.
We're here on Collaboraction Radio on WCPT 820 AM. We're talking to Daniel Chapman-Smith of Project Humanity, which is an arts organization and theater company in Toronto. Also in the studio is Sarah Illiatovitch-Goldman. And if you want to call in with a question or a comment, we're at 773-763-WCPT. That's 773-763-9278. And what's cool here is that Dan's been doing this for a while. He's got a lot of hours in working with young people. And we have a lot of young people here in Chicago that are not getting everything they need to fully succeed. And if you want to call in to ask a question or share a comment about your perspective about young people in Chicago and how we should and could use art as a way to spark their creativity, their confidence, call in. We'd love to have you join the conversation. So, do you consider yourself an activist through your practice?
What a great question. I don't know if I would consider myself an activist. I mean,
And you're an artivist.
Yeah, I'm definitely an artivist. Yeah, I mean, to me, activist is sort of like, there's like a pounding the pavement aspect of that, like trying to like...
marching and...
Yeah, and rage against the forces, that kind of thing. And I'm like, I don't have a ton of rage against the force in my kind of ethos. I'd much rather be like dealing with the people on the ground and working out, what can we do in spite of the system to try and, to find the ways to start making things work. I mean, if I think about the system, the shelters system is one of the systems I'm working within, and there's tons of problems with it and how it's constructed. And I do think it would be great to have someone saying, like, here's how things need to change and having response to that. However, I'm starting to see how Project Humanity in and of itself can be an injection to the system that actually changes the system. Because one of the problems is the pieces don't speak to each other, right? There are other organizations that offer amazing free arts programming for youth on the margins. And there are tons of youth on the margins in shelters and in different places that could benefit from that programming. But the vast majority of the youth that I encounter, I actually go to the shelter, and they don't know anything about the programs. And if they do, they're like, I don't know if I'm going to take an hour bus ride to get all the way there. They're not connected, right? And I think Project Humanity has the ability to make those connections, and that's something that we're starting to do. We have our own programs that we run, but we try through the course of that program to say, by the way, now you know us, we're cool. We're going to do this thing over here where you can come and get a meal and do arts any day of the week. Come check this place out. And then they physically get their bodies into that space, and what do you know? They start going back.
And tell us, I would say that you it seems to me you qualify as an agent of change. You're taking actions consistently for a long time. And maybe if we looked at the difference between maybe a hard activist and a soft activist, you're working in and I don't mean soft as in weak.
Yeah.
I mean more gentle.
Yeah.
More humane.
I definitely identify as soft. It's cool.
More about heart.
Yeah.
Than boots on the ground.
Yeah.
So what kind of work is coming out of the young people when you start, theater games and I imagine improv and writing? What are the common themes, or what are the things that really stick with you about what they're going through and what their voice is bringing to the moment?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm going to give a unified answer, I'd say what strikes me about what comes from them is the maturity and the perspective they have on the world, how real and relevant it feels. And there's just so much brilliance, so many brilliant individuals in that space who, when they do start playing with an art form that kind of jives with them, they pop. They're just so exciting to watch. In terms of like the themes, often that like there's some aspect of like they're young people. You go to young people anywhere, and there's so much commonality. That was one of the things I was struck by in the early days. I was like, oh, these are just other young people. This doesn't feel like a different human. I know what this is. But they do have a particular perspective. I think their perspectives are thrilling and important. And I think that's why like consulting young people who are the least served by our society is one of the most important sources of sort of information and perspective. And then the depth, like they can drop into moments in ways that shock you. There was one, we do sometimes improv games, which generally you're trying to get a laugh or do something kind of fun. We were doing one where you're supposed to sort of create a bit of a premise within the context. So you start talking, and the other person in the improv isn't doing anything. They're kind of quiet until you lay the foundation of the improv. And so people come up with like different silly scenarios, and they play one side of it. And there was one young woman who was kind of like a little nervous to do it, but finally, like through a bit of coaxing, got up there. And I was just like, anything, just like do anything simple. This is like, we'll get you through this. And then she kind of got quiet. And then she's launched this scene talking, of a young girl talking to the mom who gave her up for adoption. And just like this chilling scene, like just flawlessly, the whole room, like, clapping, applaud, like just moved by the whole thing. And you're just like, wow, how did that come out of you?
She probably had been in process of that scene. She had probably been writing that scene, for years in her head. And you gave help to create the space for it to be shared. What you just said like 2.5 minutes ago, when we do our little recap video, we'll have to grab that line you just said about getting the voice and input from marginalized youth. Yeah. That was a quote right there that I think is so important, because if we really, like, if you look at statistics, if you want to, raise the mean, you focus on the groups that are most in need, and you help lift them up, and it raises the mean, and so that's where the change can happen. That's where we need to focus our times. And you also said something about the stigmas of walking into that home, and it also reminded me of walking into a prison as well. Yeah. And how these stigmas that we create that are supposed to help us as a society ultimately just put people in these buckets that make it very hard for them to ever get out of. Yeah. And in a way, you're going into those buckets and igniting, showing, first of all, just bringing the art of play. Yeah. And young people are supposed to play.
Exactly.
That's how they learn.
Yep.
to then go and deal with the world. And just to, like, if you're worried about where you're living and where you're eating, just to have a break, just to have 20 minutes where you're not thinking about that, can allow your central nervous system to regulate and allow your blood pressure. I mean, I can only imagine. So, I mean, you consider yourself an empath?
Yeah, I would say.
How do you deal?
He's the biggest empath. Like, it's beautiful.
How do you unload what you have to hold with these young people? I mean, I assume you were not a homeless youth.
No.
And you're going in there with an open heart. All you want to do is bring your love for theater and performance to them. But then you got to go home every day.
Yeah.
And you do that for 16 years. So how do you unload the trauma and the emotional baggage of the work that you do?
Yeah, that's a good question too. But it's a great question because you kind of know what you're talking about. There is a lift going into that space, and I think, I don't know if I have a counter to it or a balance, but to me that's...
Did you have any hobbies?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and the one thing I was gonna try and find here is
don't say pickleball.
No, I'm gonna see if there's a good tango scene here. I dance tango.
Yeah.
Oh wow! Look at him smiling now. There, he's happy. Tango is how you unload.
Yeah.
And watching baseball.
And watching
please focus.
We're gonna watch the Blue Jays tomorrow. That's very important.
So you dance.
I do, yeah. I mean, I've had so much arts exposure. I do tons of different arts things. I play piano, I play guitar. I have lots of artistic release,
which is key.
Yeah.
Can I share one of my favorite Project Humanity success stories?
Yeah.
This was, I want to say 15 years ago or something. It was a long time ago. It was, and I was brand new facilitating at the shelter with Dan, and we were leaving, and YWS, which is one of the shelters we've been in all the time, the first shelter, as Dan said, has two sides. So there's the emergency side and the stay in school side. And for a long time, PH was only in the emergency side, though now we're kind of in both. But as we were leaving, this young man came running up to Dan and was so excited to see him. And he was saying, "Oh, I haven't seen you because I've been moved from the emergency side to the stay in school side." And now he's back in school. He was getting a degree from somewhere, secondary education, post-secondary education. And he told Dan the story about how his first semester in school, he didn't have any money for textbooks, and how the shame that he'd been feeling about not having money was stopping him from going back to school. But through just improv games with Project Humanity, he felt like he could find his voice again and stand up for himself. And so he told his professor his situation and the classmates, and they crowdsourced, funded his textbooks for him. And he was here to tell Dan, he was so excited to share with him, that just the opportunity to find himself again let him stand up in this way bigger, better situation. And that moment, I was like, oh my God, what we are doing here is so big. Yeah. And that's what I love, is PH makes all these offers in all these different ways, but not as a savior to these young people, but as a tool so these young people can fulfill their own futures.
Sarah.
Yeah.
So can you connect the work that you did with Collaboraction with the work that you the work that PH does, and also offer any insights on how, where we are within the sphere of Chicago and Toronto? And so Sarah came to Chicago from Toronto. She
13 years ago, 12 years ago.
She was an intern And then I think she helped us with our crime scene tour in 20.
Well, I was an intern doing like dramaturgy support just when you moved into social justice, and the reason I felt I could be helpful there was because I'd come from working with Project Humanity. I'd been in the shelter system working with them, and we didn't even get to talk about it, but like the amazing art that they create from the work that they do. And then I came to Chicago and connected with you just through art stuff. And as we got there, you're like, we're doing social justice theater now. And I was like, I love it.
And then you went on to write and perform in your Peace Hospital, which was amazing. And you co-wrote with me This Is Not a Cure for Cancer, which is a show that was based on my experience with my father and his cancer and death.
Yeah.
And
then he died of a very similar cancer, of the cancer that my brother just died to. So I was like really prepared as much as one can be through that. It's like, what do you get in the full Whipple?
Yeah.
I know all the surgical terms now.
Right. So you must have felt like you were... You knew my experience with my dad. Now you were living what I went through to a certain degree, which you had already lived through it with me.
Yep.
And anyway, that's another show. But can you just? I guess the real thing I would rather want to know about, and forget the work. I mean, the work is the work, but what are the commonalities of the young people in Toronto and Chicago, and the challenges that they face, and your perspective on the ground, also with the work you did with Roosevelt?
Yeah. I mean, it's what Dan said, right? Once you get past the systemic barriers of I'm going into a shelter or I'm going into a prison or in Chicago, I'm going into that neighborhood, they're just people. And the reason I brought up before, like that Dan and folks were all the same age as the youth, was mirrored that much more intensely. When you're like, literally, we're the same age. And one of the shelters we used to go into, and I think are still connected with, they're doing different programming there, was almost next door to the theater school that both Dan and I attended, and around the corner from the apartment I lived in. So this very, like, you're me, I'm you kind of thing. And that's been my experience with everyone I've met through Collaboraction as well. Though I would say the big difference is the way that Chicago's spread out, it's sometimes easier not to see each other in that kind of way. And, there's different systemic problems in the States and in Canada. And so there's different systemic barriers to break through, but the results on the people are the same. And a lot of it is the people not being seen as people, but being seen as statistics, being seen as issues for other people to deal with, as opposed to being seen as their own, like, brilliance. And
one day, maybe we'll get on the other side of that, but it's gonna take a lot more people to start thinking about other people.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's sad sometimes to feel like we're stuck in this gap of evolution. Where there's some people that are willing to, pick a path that serves others, and there are other people that would never consider that path. And some of them are our neighbors and family members and friends. And yet there's this invisible wall that separates the way we approach others. And so, Dan, I salute you for the work that you're doing, and I'm so glad you could come and hang out with us in Chicago. You're gonna meet some other amazing Chicago companies that I want to give a quick shout out to, but I'll let you guys do that. Who are you seeing while you're in town?
Yeah, I'm so stoked.
Well, we're connecting with Theater Y, who's been on this very show.
Melissa Lorraine out of Theater Y. Yeah, we have an episode with her, and she's out in North Lawndale, where she is creating a theater and a community center in an amazing building. You're going to go out to her space?
I'm so excited.
It's really cool.
Yeah. Albany Park Theater, which is the best.
Albany Park Theater Project, David Feiner and the team there are doing, here's the thing. What they're doing is so advanced.
Yeah, and they've been doing it for so long.
And it's so high quality. And the organizational support that they have, that they cultivated, I think David just hypnotizes foundations and wealthy people with the work, because the work is that good, Yeah. But it's what they're doing right now. They basically bought a building.
Yeah, we're going to the building.
To make it a theater. And you walk through this apartment building, and they've turned the apartments into little stages of immersive theater.
That's amazing.
They're incredible.
And then Storycatchers Theater, which, they do work in youth prisons, helping youth share their stories, and then helping those youth, then they create full pieces in the prisons.
Musicals.
Full original musicals from their life stories. And they have a special place in my heart because I ran music and writing workshops in those prisons through a connection with Storycatchers. So they are a gold star standard for me in that kind of on the ground work.
Exciting. What are your goals of coming to Chicago? What are you hoping to get?
Yeah, a big part of this is just having these conversations, figuring out, how different people are approaching the work. I've had a few opportunities. We've, like Sarah said, we didn't really get into the theater work that we do, but we've toured shows across Canada. And whenever I end up in another city, I try to make a point of finding a shelter and having a conversation while I'm there.
And what are those shows like?
So those are based in verbatim theater. Like documentary style theater. And so this is interviewing people and using the exact, the transcripts word for word to construct theatrical stories. And so the first one we did was talking to youth that we were working with at that first shelter. And the play represents 16 youth and 5 caseworkers from the shelter. And it just goes through that encounter of getting to know those youth and understanding their stories on a deeper level. And then bringing that to a wider audience, so they're seeing humans instead of whatever their preconceptions of shelter youth are, right?
That's the neighbors you were talking about who don't want to see. That's where PH steps in. So it's cool, you don't want to see these people as people? Come to a theater space, learn their stories of their real lives, their real words, and then try not to see them as people. And here, so it's trying to connect
kind
both
of thaw
of those
the
pieces.
ice a little
That's
bit,
right.
change the preconceptions. Yeah. Project Humanity.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us here at Collaboraction Radio. You can check Project Humanity out where? On all the social medias and
all
website.
the places. www.projecthumanity.ca, not .com, because we're Canadian. .ca. I know. It's crazy. I know there's not supposed to be other countries outside of here, but
It's our international show today at Collaboration Radio.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining, and I hope that we can keep the dialogue going. I'm sure Sarah will make sure that happens. And I love Toronto, so I'm due for a trip.
Get up. We'll take you around.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do some improv games.
Yes. Yeah, we'll bring you in for a session.
Thank you for hanging with us, everybody, here at Collaboration Radio. That was episode 55. Double nickel. What's the joke, Dan?
Oh my God, it's terrible. What concert costs 45 cents?
I don't know. What concert costs 45 cents?
A 50-cent concert with Nickelback.
Boom.
Yes.
Oh no.
Yeah, folks, come out and see us at the DNC. We will be performing Monday at 1:30 and 3, and Thursday 12:30 and 2:30, and then we'll be at Millennium Park on Friday, so you know where to find us.
The preceding program, Collaboraction Radio, was sponsored by Collaboraction, and to the extent applicable, their guests. The views